So, okay, so the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
Are you talking about the movie or the book? Because I don't. It seems like. Are you a big fan of the movie?
I like both the book and the movie. Yeah.
So
they're a little different, but
Sure.
I think the experience of the wizard is the same.
Just so they kind of go in there. They expect the Oz, great and powerful.
Right, and he's just this frail, afraid old man.
So you're saying that experience, which kind of mirrors so much of many people's experience with like authority or...
In fact, very few people, like it used to be, if you asked a kid back in the 50s, like, who's your hero? Kids could like rattle off a list of people who are their hero. But today, if you ask this current generation, very few people have heroes because I think there's like, if I put my hope in a hero, I'm just going to be disappointed by them. I remember this moment when...
You think Instagram and all the social media has made these people more accessible and therefore less able to be on pedestals because they would say something stupid or human or something?
Possibly, or just news. You know, we have access to so much information and some could say a moral decline.
Yeah,
so,
sure.
So yeah, just in general, people don't live in a way that's really hero worthy. There was a moment where my husband and I were pretty faithful watchers of the Tour de France.
Oh.
And I can remember clearly.
I love what you just did there. You didn't call it the Tour de France.
No.
You got all French on me.
That's right. I cannot pronounce French words.
Did you have a favorite rider?
So every year, you know, we'd have someone we're rooting for.
Yeah, sure.
And there's this one year we were at his family's second home in the mountains in Auvergne, and every
That's
afternoon,
over in France for those of you listening.
Yes, we're watching the Tour de France, and we'd root for someone,
Yeah.
and then they'd get busted in a drug test.
Oh, no.
So then the next day we were like, okay, who
no.
are we going to root for now?
no.
And then they got eliminated.
It's like
so then we just stopped rooting for
cheaters.
people
Yeah.
because they all kept getting eliminated for drug use. And I feel like that's just in general how, you know, heroes don't really exist in our culture. They've all been eliminated. And I think that's kind of the experience that we see in The Wizard of Oz. They look behind the curtain and they're wildly disappointed by what they find there.
Yeah, so you're saying this is like the anti-example of what's happening in Matthew 17 on the mountain.
Absolutely.
So this is like the 180.
This is the
anti-example.
Stranger Things.
Yeah, the upside down. Oh, I love that. I love what you did there.
Yeah.
So talk to me about when you, because first of all, before we get into this, and I don't know how much you want to get into this, Matthew 17 might be one of the weirdest passages in the Bible. Nothing like this happens, like something similar to this happens a couple of times, but nothing like this happens anywhere else in the entire Bible. Two people who are giant heroes who are dead show up, talk to this is madness. Now, we've had other moments in the Bible that are weird. Isaiah gets ushered into the throne room, right?
There's
some weird stuff. Ezekiel has a crazy dream.
There's an axe. There's a finger writing. There's all kinds of.
That's super weird.
There's fun things.
Right. Yeah. And so there's even when Stephen is dying, he kind of sees.
Oh yeah, the curtain opens.
The curtains of. So there's some weird, crazy stuff that reveals.
I'm a big fan of this passage myself.
But this is really weird. So when you encountered, did you kind of feel the weirdness of it? Because it's weird. Elijah and Moses are talking to Jesus in front of Peter, James, and John.
Yeah.
And then God, Yahweh, God the Father speaks.
Yeah.
So it's pretty crazy.
I think, maybe I'm just weird like that, but I'm into it. I'm so into it. Interestingly, I think a little bit of it is our Protestantism. You know, historically, the Feast of the Transfiguration is one of the 12 great feasts that the church celebrates every year. But we kind of don't have that because we're not like celebrating the traditional Christian calendar. So I think the Transfiguration is a little bit lost on the Protestant church. It's much more in the forefront of a church that celebrates, you know, a church calendar.
So what historically, you've done more research on this than I, what historically is the Feast of Transfiguration supposed to evoke in a follower?
Yeah.
What's it supposed to remind us? Because feasts are like reminders, right?
Absolutely.
So what is it supposed to remind us or teach us in that rhythm?
Yeah, so actually they would have just celebrated it. It's August the 6th. And on that day, people wear white to kind of commemorate this idea that Jesus' clothes were whiter than even a launder could get them. And interestingly, they bring grapes.
Tide Pods. They bring Tide Pods. No. For their white laundry.
Oh, no. The Tide Pod Challenge. No.
What do they bring?
They bring grapes. And they bless the grapes. It's very interesting.
What's that mean?
They pray a blessing over the grapes, and then they eat them as a celebration of the Transfiguration.
Feels like this celebration was brought to you by Napa Valley.
That's right. And then they have a beautiful liturgy that they read. They have a whole separate liturgy for the Transfiguration that is different from the ones that they would do on other Sundays. So it's like a whole thing that every year they're like remembering the Transfiguration. For them, it's a very, like one of the 12. It's one of 12. One of 12 feasts that they want to be like before the people on an annual basis.
Okay, so if you were trying to communicate, which you did, but if you're trying to communicate to me and other believers why the Transfiguration is such a big deal, why it deserves to be one of the 12 moments.
Yeah.
Because again, we actually kind of forget some of this other stuff. We forget completely the ascension.
Yeah.
We just basically do the birth, the death, the resurrection, but we kind of forget about the ascension. Why is the Transfiguration, this moment in Matthew 17, why is it so important for us to keep in mind as you have thought about this passage and reflected on it? What does it do for you? What do you want it to do? And other people, like when you think about your kids, like they're, when they're thinking about Jesus, why is this moment important?
Yeah. So I think there's two huge takeaways from this passage. The first is that in this moment, we can see undeniably that Jesus is God. In the chapter before, Matthew 16, that we read about 8 months ago, something like that.
A long time ago.
The question was,
to Peter.
First he says, "Who do they say I am?"
Right,
then he points to the disciples, "Who do you say I am?" And
Peter makes
answers,
the pronouncement.
Right. You're the Messiah.
And this is the first time in the text that somebody has said that. Like one of the disciples has said that.
The disciples.
Other people have.
Right.
Yeah, other
Interestingly,
people,
other non-Jews have stated it.
Interesting.
But here's the first time his disciples really are able to verbalize that.
So Peter gets it.
Peter gets it, but I think he doesn't get it. I think in this moment, in the Transfiguration, because, this word Messiah means the anointed one, which is referring to a king, right? King David was the anointed one. He was anointed as king. Of course, they realize this is like King 2.0, but I don't think they fully realize everything that Jesus Messiah is until this moment, the Transfiguration, where we really see that Jesus is Emmanuel, God with us, God incarnate.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because there's some weird aspects, like he starts glowing.
Yeah.
Which is reminiscent to me of, the thing that came to my mind, and I'm not Jewish, but Peter, James, and John certainly were. They must have thought about the vision that Ezekiel had, where the Son of Man, this weird humanoid figure, appears and begins speaking to him. It's like God's representative glowing in white. I have this, I wrote it down. That's in, listen to Ezekiel chapter 1. I looked and saw what appeared from a figure that was like a man, and I saw from what appeared to be his waist, he looked like glowing metal, as if on fire. He looked like fire, and a brilliant light surrounded him. Like the appearance of a rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day, so was the radiance around him.
Yeah.
And then in chapter 8, this figure, the Son of Man, this mysterious Son of Man, who's God's representative, comes back and it says he was as bright as glowing metal. And then in Daniel, I thought about Daniel, the vision that Daniel has in Daniel 7 and then later in 10. I looked up and there was a man, one of those is as appearance as though a man dressed in white linen, his belt of fine gold, his body was like topaz, his face was like lightning, and his voice like the sound of a multitude. And you see that those images carried on when John has the vision way at the end of the Bible in Revelation. there's one dressed like a son of man in Revelation 1, dressed in a robe, in a golden sash. His head was white like wool, as white as snow. His eyes were like blazing fire, and his voice was like the sound of rushing water. So you see these images kind of keep going through. So that was the first thing that came to mind, that this is not Jesus, the lowly carpenter, walking along the dust.
And it's in such stark contrast, because from the beginning of Jesus' ministry, he's been so humble, right? Born in this stable, so lowly, willingly living in poverty. And in this moment, we actually see him as he truly is. And it's like, oh my gosh, woe is me, I am a man of unclean lips.
Right,
it's like
right.
the guys fall down on the
they
ground.
do. Yeah,
they're like,
yeah.
oh my gosh, we can't even, how can we be in his presence?
Right.
It's overwhelming to them.
So for you, this moment of transfiguration is it's tied to Peter's announcing that he's the Messiah times like 50. He sees like, oh my gosh, what I said was true, but is way more true than even I could even possibly have understood or imagined.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
And then you've got the ratification of God the Father's voice, which is reminiscent of the baptism. Like, this is my son with whom I'm well pleased. But then there's another added little line here. So follow, listen him. Like
listen to him.
Yeah. And not like just hear him, but like do what he says.
Do what he says, right. So you've got Moses, who's there, the representative of the Old Testament law. You have Elijah, who's there, the representative of the Old Testament prophets. And God is saying, you imagine, Peter, John, James, they're looking at their childhood heroes. Speaking of heroes, they're looking at their heroes, Moses and Elijah. And God is like, those guys are cool and all, but this is my son. Listen to him. And the most famous prayer Jews would have prayed is the Shema, which is this, I'm going to listen, meaning I'm going to hear, I'm going to obey. And God's saying, I want you to Shema Jesus.
Ooh. Oh, so there's that neat level of Jewish Shema-ness on top of that. That's really interesting.
So much Shemaing.
Yeah. One other thing that I don't know if you had time to get into this. I love this idea that you and Jay both brought out, which was that both Elijah and Moses were, yes, they were a stand-in for the law and the prophets, but as leaders, they both kind of experienced God in his fullness, but not really.
Yeah, they both had these really interesting mountaintop moments. Just speaking of these mountains, right? So Moses has this time where he goes up the mountain and he wants to experience God's presence, and God's pretty much like, you actually can't handle
this.
This
is in Exodus 33.
This would kill you.
Right.
So he's like, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have you hide in like the crook, the nanny. How do you say that? The cranny, the cleft.
The cleft.
A cleft
it's a weird,
chin.
Yeah, it's weird. The cleft of a rock.
Hide in this rock, and my presence is going to pass by you. And it says that Moses gets to see like the backside of God's glory.
So God moons
right,
Moses.
there you go.
Yeah,
there you go.
That's what every teen boy thinks.
Then Moses comes down, and his face is like shiny.
Yeah.
And he's like reflecting. He's not emanating the light himself in the way that Christ is in this moment. As Christ is shining, this is actually coming from him because he is God. But Moses
is like residual glory.
He's like the moon. You know, the moon doesn't actually produce light. It's just reflecting the light of the sun.
Yeah.
And it's like, because he even just saw the presence of God pass by, his face is like shining with the glory of God. So he has this experience where the presence passes him by. And then Elijah, same thing.
Well, same mountain. They're both on Sinai, which is crazy. Isn't that crazy?
So crazy.
I just read this today, and I was like, wait, what? It's the same place. Anyway, go ahead.
So he wants to experience God's presence, and there's this whole thing. There's this great wind, and God was not there. And God's presence passes by. And it's like, he just gets to see this like fleeting, just a little bit. And it's actually so beautiful because now these two guys are actually seeing their hero. Right? Like Moses and Elijah, both of them prophesied about the coming Messiah.
Yeah.
Both of them saw this passing by.
It's like
of
a
the
glimmer,
presence,
not the whole thing, just a bit.
And here, in this moment, they're getting to see the one that they had always hoped to see. There's this beautiful passage in Hebrews 11 that kind of talks about this.
A beautiful passage in what?
Hebrews 11.
Okay.
Let me see if I can pull that up. You can edit this, right?
I think so. I think people love sitting in silence. It's their favorite thing.
Sorry. I have so many tabs open.
I can imagine.
Where is it? What in the literal world? Where is it? I'm sorry.
I don't know. You want me to pull it up?
No. It's here somewhere. No. Where did I put it?
You can paraphrase if you...
Did I delete it? Holy cow.
Hebrews 11.
Yes. There's 2 verses and they're so cool. But why can't I find it? Promise. What in the world? I'm so sorry. Promise.
By faith, Moses' parents...
Oh, there it is. Gosh.
Okay.
I cannot read. Here we go. Sorry.
Go ahead.
There's this beautiful verse in, actually a couple of verses in Hebrews 11, and it says, all of these people, and it's speaking about the heroes of the faith,
Sure.
which
Abraham,
would include
Moses, Elijah.
Moses and
all
Elijah.
yeah.
Absolutely. It says all of these people died still believing what God had promised them. That is, this coming Messiah who will crush the serpent's head, right, in Genesis 3. And it said, they did not receive what they promised, but they saw it all from a distance, just this passing by, and they welcomed it. And then it goes on in verse 39 and said, all these people earned a good reputation because of their faith, yet none of them had received all that God promised, for God had something better in mind for us. And now they're seeing firsthand the better thing that God had in mind, this Jesus, not just anointed king, but anointed King Emmanuel, God with us. So this would have been a
it's like the
beautiful
completion. It's really cool.
Absolutely.
So,
and
yeah.
Moses representing the law, Elijah representing the prophets. Jesus is the fulfillment of all of those promises, of all of those scriptures. In fact, there's that story after the resurrection where these guys are on the road to Emmaus and they see resurrected Jesus, but they don't recognize him.
Right.
And it says, Jesus explained the scriptures to them, going through the law and the prophets, explaining the plan of God.
How it all pointed to Jesus.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
All about him.
Hey, 2 other things about this. First, let's talk about the reaction of the disciples, because I found this really interesting. So God shows up, he talks, there's the brilliance of Jesus, he's transformed. Moses is there, Elijah's there, and their result is, it says that they cower in fear and they fall down.
Yeah.
And I did some preliminary looking at this. It seems like every single person who encounters God falls down. So, or is afraid, right? So it starts in Genesis 3, right? I heard the sound in the garden and I hid. Moses in the burning bush.
Yeah.
Moses hid his face. He was afraid. Mount Sinai, and there was all the people are gathered. There's a rumbling. God shows up. They're afraid.
Yeah.
2 Chronicles, the very first time the temple kind of opens up, God's glory shows up. The priests could not stand to minister. They were shook and they fell down. Yeah. Isaiah, when he encounters God in his vision, like you just said, woe is me, and he falls down. Luke, when the angel of the Lord stands before the shepherds, they're terribly frightened. When the wise men come, they fall down on their face before Jesus, the infant. When Jesus is about to get arrested,
the
guards all fall down.
Yeah.
In Revelation, when John sees the risen Christ, the one we just talked about, the white, glowing lightning Jesus, he falls at his feet as though dead.
Yeah.
It seems like no humans can stand before God.
Absolutely.
And I think we forget that. I forget that.
Totally. Just
this idea that no one stands before God. You don't stand when God shows up. You just don't. It's like a thing. And I really think in my own arrogance, I kind of can or should. And so there's something about the proper place of God. And there's a term for this. I think it's dolores tremens, the fear of the Lord. You fall down. Like this is the human reaction when encountering God
Yeah.
is to fall. And so that's something
Absolutely.
to talk. And so I know the fear of God is something that can be manipulated. We've talked about that a lot. People have abused that and all that. Is there a proper place for fear? And how do you think about the fear? How do you think about what happened to Peter and James and John? How do you think about their reaction? Just how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think so. There's two things I think that the Transfiguration teaches us. The first is that Jesus is God, and if Jesus is God, he is completely worthy of our awe and our worship, our allegiance, and our obedience. So, so holiness, I mean, that's we could spend hours talking about.
Yeah.
What does it mean that God is holy? But when we realize, first of all, his perfection, his awe, his wonder, he's so far above us. At the same time, that moves us to gratitude, because it's by the blood of Jesus that he makes it possible for us to draw near to God. So that should just fill us with love and gratitude and thanksgiving. But his otherness, like God's thoughts are not my thoughts, his ways are not my ways. He is so far above me, kind of Job's conclusion at the end of the book that, wow, I spoke of things I didn't actually understand at all. I think that's a really healthy place I can remember the first time I went to the Grand Canyon. I'd seen pictures of it, and I thought I understood how big it was, and then I got there, and I don't think I could talk. It was so much grander, so much bigger, so much more beautiful. I just stood in awe and wonder of its greatness. And if you were to come face to face with the presence of God himself, like completely unveiled before you, it would be the Grand Canyon times a million.
Mm-hmm. I felt that way the first time I saw Cheesecake Factory's menu. So just weeping at just the magnitude and the beauty.
Their serving sizes, yes.
Their portions.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that. Yeah. Okay. So, and it does say the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So fear, and fear is an okay place to start. Perfect love, however, casts out fear. So it does make sense that, humans are self-preservation. There's a self-preservation in us.
And I love Jesus touches them. So they're
it says
afraid.
he touches? I didn't see
Jesus
that.
touches them and says, do not fear.
Oh, see, that's awesome.
So that's a great
yes, that's a great sign.
Step 2, right?
Yeah.
Like first, be in awe and wonder, shock and awe.
Yeah, totally.
But then, what's crazy, I mean, God could melt us.
Totally, yeah.
And he touches them and says, don't fear.
Yeah. Now, to be fair, humans can't just approach God any way they want, but God can approach any human any way he wants.
Absolutely.
So that it works that way.
And this whole thing is pointing to the cross, the mechanism by which he'll even make it possible for us to be in his presence without melting.
Yeah. Sorry, I think I think I derailed this. You said that the Transfiguration actually shows two core things. One is the just the sovereignty, the bigness, that Jesus is actually God.
Right.
What was the second one that you kind of pointed out? That we should listen and obey him? Is that what it was?
No,
or did I mishear it?
The second is the reality of the resurrection and second coming. The Transfiguration is pointing us towards the hope of resurrection and second coming. So very interesting. In a hymn in the Byzantine liturgy that is from the 6th century, okay? It's called...
I think everyone here is excited about going into Byzantine
right?
literature. Yeah, really.
Their hymn book...
Thanks for bringing that in. That's really...
Their hymn book called the Kontakion. This is what they say should be our takeaways from the Transfiguration. It says this: on the mountain you were transfigured, O Christ God, and your disciples beheld your glory as far as they could see it, so that when they would behold you crucified, they would understand that your suffering was voluntary, and would proclaim to the world that you truly are the radiance of the Father.
Wow.
So they have these two parts. You're the radiance of the Father, a.k.a. Jesus is God.
Right.
God's not a guru, a teacher, a prophet, or a philosopher. He is God.
Right.
And two, this idea, your suffering is voluntary. Jesus said, no one's taking my life away from me. I willingly lay it down so that I will take it back up again. And here they're seeing Jesus in his full glory and power. And in fact, there's a later verse that says that our bodies also will be transfigured as we are resurrected, that will receive new heavenly bodies. And
I can't wait.
in a way, this is a
I think
foretaste.
I'm going to be thinner and stronger.
Nice. And then the fact that Elijah and Moses are here also give us this hope of the resurrection, that here are two gentlemen who have clearly
died,
passed on in some way. They actually both have very interesting passings, mysterious passings. Elijah's taken up in this
Elijah's
chariot.
taken up. Moses dies, though.
Yes, it says that God buried him. It's very interesting.
Oh, so there's a little. I've never studied that.
They both have these mysteries.
So Moses is kind of like
surrounding
mysteriously dead?
Yeah,
Interesting.
both of them. But
they're kept by God.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The reality that death is not the end.
Ooh.
And that this God Messiah will actually defeat death is so powerful. So speaking of Hebrews, there's this other amazing verse that says, because God's children are human beings made of flesh and blood, the Son also became flesh and blood, for only as a human being could he die, and only by dying could he break the power of the devil who had the power of death, and only in this way could he set free all of those who have lived their lives as slaves to the fear of dying. So this amazing God Messiah. So before this, in chapter 16, first, there's the conversation, who do you say I am? But then right after that, Jesus is like,
I'm going to die.
Peter, you're right. I am the Messiah. And just so you know, Messiah isn't what you think. I'm not going to actually come in with machine guns and conquer Rome. I'm actually going to let them arrest me, beat me, kill me, but I'm going to raise. And Peter's like, no way, that's never happening to you. And Jesus' response is, not only is that going to happen to me, but I'm asking you also to pick up your cross and follow me, which is the last thing on earth these dudes want to hear.
Yeah.
And so now this transfigured Jesus,
who's clearly God,
is
going to clearly die.
His plan is still and in fact, it says in Luke, what was it that Jesus was talking about with Moses and Elijah? It says in Luke chapter 9, I believe, it says that they were discussing Jesus' death. So right here in all my radiant glory, I could melt the universe with one word, I'm still choosing voluntarily
the cross.
To lay down my life on the cross to rescue you so that you can be resurrected. And I'm coming back again in this form, my transfigured form, to rule and reign for eternity in the second coming.
So in this moment, the cross, well, it's super clear to Peter, this is God. So when he gets killed, that doubt isn't introduced. Oh, maybe he wasn't God. And then all of a sudden, we see the merging of the cross and the glory of Christ in one. They're the same. They're two sides of the necessary Jesus coin.
Yeah.
Which is incredible. Yeah. What is interesting, and we talked about this briefly, you would think that this transfiguration would have helped Peter in the denial thing.
Yeah, it's so weird when Jesus denies Christ.
Peter.
Sorry, yeah. What did I say?
Right, when Peter denies.
When Peter denies Christ in that courtyard, he's denying the Christ he saw transfigured, which is wild. He must have just been so scared, so
he must have been,
confused. I mean, Jesus was pretty
overt.
upfront,
Yeah,
overt, like,
yeah.
hey, I'm going to die and raise again. But it was just like they couldn't, does not compute.
Right.
But Peter later in his life, after he sees the resurrected Jesus, actually gets a lot of hope from this transfiguration moment. In 2 Peter chapter 1,
Which Peter wrote.
he is writing about his upcoming death. And he says this.
Peter's upcoming death.
Yeah.
Where Peter's going to get killed.
Peter's about to be executed.
Right.
And so he's writing the church and, hey guys, I can tell my days are numbered here. Here are kind of my last words for you as
Yeah.
I shepherd you, and I'm
Powerful.
I'm heading out of here.
Yeah, powerful.
And he says this. It's in 2 Peter 1:13. He said, I think it is right to refresh your memory as long as I live in this tent of a body, because I know that I will soon put it aside, as the Lord Jesus made it clear to me, which he did in that beautiful conversation with the resurrected Jesus in the Gospel of John, where Jesus actually is redeeming his denial and says, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? But then Jesus tells Peter and says, there's going to come a day when people are going to tie you up and bring you where you don't want to go.
And dress you in clothes you don't want to be dressed in. Yeah. You're going to be
foretelling
you're gonna be
Peter's
crucified.
execution. And then Peter goes on to say, I will make every effort to see that after my departure, you will always be able to remember these things. For we did not follow cleverly devised stories when we told you about the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ in power, but we were eyewitnesses of his majesty. And here he's speaking of the transfiguration. He received honor and glory from God the Father when the voice came to him from the majestic glory, this cloud that came down, saying, this is my Son, whom I loved. With him I am well pleased. We overheard this voice ourselves that came from heaven when we were with him there on the sacred mountain.
Yeah.
So this vision of Jesus transfigured is giving him hope and courage as he faces his execution.
He's actually God. He went to the cross for us. I saw Elijah and Moses. They were kept. Jesus had them. He died. He resurrected just like I saw.
And I will be resurrected.
and I'll be
Though I die,
Yeah.
yet I shall live.
This tent of a body.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Good stuff. A lot in there.
This passage is amazing.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. And I love the practice of commemorating it every year, just reminding ourselves again and again, Jesus is God, he's defeated death, I will resurrect, and Jesus is coming back again to set all things right. That's a really healthy reminder for us.
Well, let's bless some grapes, and
Yeah.
we should enact a new festival
There we
tradition.
go.
It would be
There we
fun.
go.
All right. Well, thanks for stopping by. Lots in this passage. Very weird. Very, very, very weird, but very, like you said, very instructive. All right. Well, thanks a ton for being with us, Karina, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks.